We need more Israel, Bill Maher declares.
And finally, new rule for all the progressives and academics who refer to Israel as an outpost of Western civilization like it's a bad thing. Please note, Western civilization is what gave the world pretty much every goddamn liberal precept that liberals are supposed to adore. Individual liberty, scientific inquiry, rule of law, religious freedom, women's rights, human rights, democracy, trial by jury, freedom of speech. And since one can find all these concepts in today's Israel and virtually nowhere else in the Middle East, if anything, the world would be a better place if it had more Israels.
Let's talk about the outright lies Bill Maher tries to pass off to his audience, too stupid to actually fact check what's being said. Individual liberty for the Palestinians who are occupied by the Zionist entity, that they are a belligerent occupying force, belligerently occupying even the Gaza Strip, let alone the West Bank, who erect walls of separation to literally prevent the free movement of Palestinians on lands that they've lived for centuries, if not millennia. Or the 65 laws of discrimination that both the Palestinians of the West Bank and those living in the place they call Israel today are subjected to. The fact that a Palestinian Israeli cannot marry anyone from outside of Israel and bring them to their home demonstrates the discrimination they face and the lack of individual liberty. Or the Palestinians living in Israel need special permission to buy a home outside of the Arab enclaves they currently live in. Individual liberty doesn't sound like it, does it, Bill? What about women's rights? Oh, you mean when Israel had an enforced sterilization program on Ethiopian Jewish women because they didn't want them to breed the wrong color for Israel.
They arrived here as part of a program to fly all the remaining Jews out of Ethiopia. But some women say they were coerced into taking injections every 3 months for birth control.
Or do you mean democracy? You mean when Israel enacts a law called the nation-state law that ensures that in Israel the right to exercise national self-determination in Israel is unique to the Jewish people.
Israeli lawmakers have passed a law declaring the country the, quote, nation state of the Jewish people. The law says only Jews hold the right to exercise national self-determination in Israel.
What about trial by jury? Well, just in August 2023, before October 7th, approximately 1,200 Palestinians were held under Israel's policy of administrative detention without trial and under allegations that Israeli authorities keep secret. According to the Amnesty International report, they said testimony from released detainees and human rights lawyers, as well as video footage and images, illustrate some of the forms of torture and of other ill treatment prisoners have been subjected to by the Israeli forces over the past 4 weeks. These include severe beatings and humiliation of detainees, including by forcing them to keep their heads down, to kneel on the floor during inmate count, and to sing Israeli songs. Does that sound like rule of law? Does that sound like trial by jury? Something that is to be exported. We need more of this. We need more Israel. And what about freedom of speech? Israel passed a law in 2011 that can deny institutions funding if they commemorate the Nakba, the catastrophe when 750,000 people were forcibly removed, ethnically cleansed in the creation of the Israeli state in 1948. Or if they question whether Israel should be characterized as a particular ethno-racial Jewish state. Imagine a state that says we will characterize ourselves as a white state or a state for a specific race, and to question that could result in your institution being defunded. Does that sound like free speech? Israel is the same state that had outlawed the Palestinian flags, not just in the so-called Israel, but also internationally recognized occupied territories of the West Bank too.
And now Israel has ordered police to remove Palestinian flags from public spaces, calling the black, white, green and red banner a terrorist symbol.
This is also the same state that claims that any boycott against Israeli companies or those companies supporting Israel is anti-Semitism and should be outlawed. Israel also regularly bans Palestinians from protesting. So where's the free speech, Bill? Where's that free speech? And that's not to mention how those Palestinians who were released recently by Israel in exchange for Israeli hostages were prohibited from celebrating their release. Interior Minister Ben-Gvir banned Palestinians from celebrating the release. He said, "My instructions are clear. There are to be no expressions of joy. Expressions of joy are equivalent to backing terrorism." He told Israeli police to deploy an iron fist to enforce his edict.
And for the record, the Jews didn't colonize Israel or anywhere ever. Gaza wasn't seized by Israel like India or Kenya was by the British Empire, and the partitioning of the region wasn't decided by Jews, but by a vote of the United Nations in 1947, with everyone from Russia to Haiti voting for it.
You seem completely oblivious to history. So yes, Israel was founded upon colonialism. Let's be clear. It was Britain who colonized Palestine, putting it under British mandate during World War I. Thereafter, Lord Balfour gave his famous declaration that he supported Zionist ambitions to establish a state upon Palestinian land, and thus promoting European Jewish migration to Palestine. And remember, this is the same Balfour who passed the Aliens Act in Britain to prevent Eastern European Jews migrating to Britain. And when Ronald Storr, the British governor of Jerusalem, was asked why they have a policy of promoting Zionism and Jewish migration to Palestine, he made the infamous statement that the purpose was forming for England a little loyal Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. He's making reference to Ireland, where they attempted to shift the demographic balance by introducing pro-British Protestant Christians to Northern Ireland who would act as loyalists to the British occupation of Ireland. So in the same way, the idea was to establish European Jews in Palestine under British colonial rule, to have a loyal Jewish population that would serve British Empire's interest. And after the waning of the British Empire, the Americans had the same idea, as Biden famously said in 1986.
There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
Or as Robert Kennedy Jr. said, Israel's situation is delicate, and the reason for its precision is that it is a fortress for us in the Middle East, and it is almost like having an aircraft carrier in the Middle East. So Bill, of course it's a colonial project, something you could have easily have understood if you got your head out of your Zionist backside and read a little bit.
Gaza wasn't seized by Israel like India or Kenya was by the British Empire, and the partitioning of the region wasn't decided by Jews, but by a vote of the United Nations.
Israel was established upon the bodies and the dispossession of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. 750,000 were ethnically cleansed. Over 500 Palestinian villages were wiped off the map. For example, Deir Yassin was a village near Jerusalem. The men, women, children were killed, with many cases of women and girls being raped before brutally being murdered.
בתים יפים, גרים כמו אירופאים, אתה יודע. וגם הנשים היו לבושות ויפה, ובאמת היה כפר אחד, אנס שם איזה ילדה בת 16, משהו כזה. אתה מבין? אבל זה מכוער מאוד, היה לנו בחור אחד, הוא נפטר, הוא היה פרא אדם, הוא לקח פשוט מאוד, ורצח אותם בתוך המכלאות.
It was done to send a message to the rest of the Palestinians to leave their homes. As for the United Nations gifting them Palestine, it's a joke of an institution. But even then, the UN agreed the Zionists could take 54% of Palestine. However, when Israel founded itself, they actually took 77% of the land, not the original 54% of the United Nations had agreed to. So where's the consistency? You're going to appeal to the United Nations or give back the rest of that land that was not granted to them or gifted to them by the United Nations. We know Zionists love to appeal to the United Nations when it suits them, but completely ignore them when it doesn't. For instance, Israel has violated numerous United Nations resolutions, whether that's to do with the prohibition of illegal occupation, prohibition of Israeli settlements on occupied land, prohibition to take land by force and claim sovereignty, violation of United Nations resolution to allow displaced Palestinians the right to return, separation barrier in the West Bank is illegal. There's just too many violations here to list, Bill. So yes, you appeal to the UN when it suits you, but completely ignore the UN when it goes against your beloved Zionist entity. Bill, we know that Israel uses comedians like yourself to help promote their propaganda. You want an example? Then check out Jake's recent video in which both Joe Rogan and Bobby Lee exposes this reality.